By 1942, World War II had entered its most scientifically terrifying phase, the race for the atomic bomb. The Allied High Command lived under the constant, crippling fear that German scientists, possessing a significant initial advantage, would successfully harness nuclear power and build a weapon of mass destruction that could win the war for Adolf Hitler. A critical, non-negotiable component in this race was heavy water, or deuterium oxide, which was necessary to moderate nuclear fission and fuel a working nuclear reactor. The entire German atomic weapons program was heavily reliant on a continuous supply of this rare substance, making its source an immediate strategic target. The German efforts were centrally reliant on one single location in occupied Europe. This target was the Norsk Hydro power plant, specifically its highly specialized hydrogen production facility located at Vimmerk, Norway. Due to a unique combination of resources and technology, the Vimmerk facility was the only industrial plant in the entire world capable of producing heavy water in the quantities needed for German nuclear research. The plant itself was an engineering marvel, built high on a steep cliffside above a deep, natural gorge in the remote Telemark region, making it naturally defensible and easily protected by massive German Wehrmacht garrisons. The British Intelligence Service and the Special Operations Executive immediately recognized that the Norsk Hydro plant was the single most vital strategic target in the entire German war machine. Its destruction was paramount and classified as absolutely essential to the Allied cause. Conventional aerial bombing was deemed too risky. The massive, reinforced concrete structure would likely survive the attack, and even a near miss would generate catastrophic loss of innocent Norwegian life in the nearby valley. A direct, surgical strike to destroy the core heavy water production chambers was the only viable option, requiring an elite force capable of penetrating the nearly impenetrable fortress in the Norwegian wilderness. The immensely dangerous mission was entrusted to a small group of highly trained Norwegian commandos. These patriots had previously fled the brutal German occupation of Norway for Britain, where they were recruited and trained by the Special Operations Executive. Crucially, they were not just soldiers. They were expert mountaineers and skiers, uniquely suited to the hostile, frozen terrain of the Telemark plateau. The plan of sabotage, codenamed Operation Gunnerside, was set into motion, relying on the precision, skill, and intimate local knowledge of these men to execute one of the most daring and strategically important raids of the entire war. The attack on the Norsk Hydro plant was preceded by months of secret, intense preparation and significant tragedy. The initial phase began in October 1942 with Operation Grouse, where 4 expert Norwegian commandos from the Special Operations Executive were successfully parachuted onto the vast, desolate Hardanger Plateau. Their critical, lonely mission was to survive the brutal Norwegian winter, establish a hidden supply and observation base, and continuously gather intelligence on the German Wehrmacht security setup at the Vimmerk facility, acting as the eyes and guides for the main force that would follow. However, the first attempt to deliver the actual demolition team resulted in a devastating failure. In November 1942, Operation Freshman was launched, utilizing 2 British gliders carrying a larger raiding party. Due to severe navigation errors and treacherous weather over Norway, both gliders tragically crashed. The surviving commandos were quickly captured by the German Wehrmacht. In a chilling demonstration of Nazi brutality, all surviving commandos were executed by the Gestapo in clear violation of the Geneva Convention, confirming that the mission was now subject to Adolf Hitler's ruthless commando order. The tragic failure of Operation Freshman left the advanced Operation Grouse team completely isolated and in a state of silent dread. They survived for months on the barren, frozen plateau, known as the hardest place to live on Earth, enduring temperatures far below freezing and constant blizzards, relying on their unparalleled survival skills, their small radio, and the occasional reindeer they managed to hunt. This small team, cut off and knowing the deadly fate of their captured comrades, remained in position, meticulously surveying the target, knowing their resilience was the absolute last hope for the entire mission. Finally, in February 1943, the main raiding party was successfully deployed. 6 highly trained Norwegian commandos from the Special Operations Executive successfully parachuted into the remote region. This group, led by Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg, formed the core of Operation Gunnerside. After enduring an arduous trek across the snow-covered plateau, the Gunnerside team successfully linked up with the advanced grouse team. The combined force of 10 expert commandos, now well-rested and possessing months of intelligence, was positioned perfectly to execute the surgical strike on the Norsk Hydro facility, facing the extreme challenge of the heavily fortified gorge below. The Norsk Hydro plant at Vimmerk was an engineering marvel built into an almost impregnable natural fortress. The heavy water production facility was perched high on a sheer cliff face, with a single, heavily guarded access road winding down from the plateau, often blocked by snow. The Germans, confident in the natural defenses, primarily focused their security on this road and a single, narrow suspension bridge that spanned the deep gorge. They believed these measures, combined with the brutal terrain, made any direct attack from the valley floor impossible. This heavily fortified external perimeter was designed to deter any large-scale assault, leaving the commandos with an almost suicidal choice. The combined force of 10 Norwegian commandos from Operation Grouse and Operation Gunnerside, led by Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg, made the audacious decision to ignore the main road and the bridge entirely. Instead, they opted for an approach that the Germans considered utterly impossible. They would descend into the deep, frozen Mana River gorge below the plant, cross the icy river, and then scale the almost vertical, ice-covered cliff face on the far side to reach the factory from its supposedly unassailable rear. This route was incredibly dangerous, requiring expert mountaineering skills and absolute silence, but it offered the element of total surprise. On the night of February 27, 1943, the commandos began their perilous descent. Equipped with skis, submachine guns, and explosives, they navigated the treacherous, snow-covered mountain trails to the edge of the gorge. Using ropes, they carefully lowered themselves hundreds of feet down the steep, icy slopes into the darkness of the ravine, their every move calculated to avoid detection. The only sound was the howling wind and the distant roar of the frozen river, adding to the extreme tension of their infiltration. Reaching the bottom, they crossed the partially frozen river, their boots breaking through thin ice, knowing that hypothermia was an immediate threat. Having successfully crossed the river, the most daunting challenge still awaited them: scaling the sheer, 500-foot-high cliff face on the opposite side of the gorge. The commandos, using their pre-scouted knowledge of the terrain and their exceptional climbing skills, began their slow, silent ascent in the darkness. Each man was weighed down with heavy equipment, but their determination was absolute. Their target was the critical heavy water plant, and they knew that if they failed, the German atomic bomb program would continue unimpeded. The fate of the war, and potentially the world, rested on their silent climb up the impossible wall of rock and ice. After the agonizing climb, the 10 Norwegian commandos finally reached the perimeter of the Norsk Hydro plant. The entire facility was a fortress, heavily protected by searchlights and patrols, yet the German Wehrmacht relied utterly on the gorge's natural defenses. The primary German Wehrmacht garrison was positioned on the single-access road and the suspension bridge, leaving the vast, steep rear side overlooking the gorge relatively undefended. The commandos successfully crossed the rail tracks leading to the plant, which were located above the ravine, their every step demanding total silence to avoid alerting the guards in the watchtowers high above. The crucial phase of infiltration began as the commandos moved into the outer facility grounds. They bypassed the main barracks, where the majority of the German Wehrmacht garrison was sleeping, relying on the absolute cover of darkness and their white camouflage suits. The Commandos successfully located their target entry point, a small, vulnerable service entrance or cable tunnel that provided immediate access underneath the heavy water production buildings. This entry point was chosen based on the meticulous, long-term intelligence gathered by the Advanced Operation Grouse team, proving the absolute value of the long months of lonely, covert reconnaissance. Inside the highly secured facility, the demolition team, led by Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg, moved with surgical precision towards the core target, the heavy water production cells. The team split into small groups, moving through the labyrinthine factory complex with maps memorized during their intensive training. They found that the internal security was surprisingly light, relying entirely on the assumption that the plant's remote location and powerful exterior defenses would deter any attack. The Commandos quickly reached the low-concentration heavy water room, which contained the most valuable existing stock of heavy water, the substance critical for the German atomic program. The final, decisive act was the placement of the explosives. The Commandos used specialized plastic explosives with slow-acting pencil timers, ensuring the charges were precisely placed on the fragile metal cells containing the heavy water. Their mission was to destroy the core production infrastructure and the current stock, but they were under strict orders to do so without damaging the rest of the vital, expensive machinery. This surgical precision was intended to prevent the attack from being viewed as an act of pure terror, thus reducing the inevitable and devastating German retaliation against the local Norwegian population. With the timer set, the Commandos prepared for the swift, silent exit, leaving behind a fused time for destruction. The Commandos, led by Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg, retreated swiftly from the Norsk Hydro plant, retracing their steps back toward the gorge. They had barely begun their ascent when the meticulously set pencil timers expired. A short, sharp explosion echoed through the gorge, confirming the mission's success. The controlled detonation was powerful enough to shatter the metal electrolysis cells and the internal piping, causing the precious stock of heavy water, nearly 900 kilograms, to cascade down the drains and into the river below. Crucially, the plant's main machinery remained structurally intact, adhering to the strict orders to avoid unnecessary destruction and thus minimize German retaliation against the Norwegian population. The explosion immediately alerted the vast German Wehrmacht garrison sleeping in the nearby barracks. The initial reaction of the Germans was one of profound confusion. Their security officers initially reported the event as a non-critical electrical failure or an internal industrial accident, so confident were they in the plant's external defenses. However, the discovery of the tiny sabotage entrance and the broken production cells quickly confirmed the terrifying truth. The humiliation of the successful infiltration fueled massive German fury, and within the hour, the entire Telemark region was placed under martial law. Tens of thousands of German Wehrmacht troops were immediately mobilized to launch a relentless and massive manhunt to recapture the perpetrators. The 10 Norwegian Commandos had already retrieved their hidden skis and commenced the most demanding phase of Operation Gunnerside, the escape. They climbed the far side of the gorge and began their high-speed, grueling ski trek across the vast, frozen expanse of the Hardanger Plateau, relying on the cover of the pre-dawn darkness to gain a critical lead. Their pace was immense, pushing themselves to the absolute limit of their physical endurance, knowing that the expert German ski patrols and tracking dogs would soon be in fierce pursuit. Their survival now depended entirely on their superior speed, endurance, and intimate knowledge of the desolate, high mountain terrain. To further complicate the predictable German pursuit, the team successfully executed a planned split. A smaller group headed north, acting as a decoy to draw attention away from the main escape route. The primary force, led by Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg, headed southeast toward the neutral border of Sweden, a journey of over 250 miles across the frozen wilderness. They carried only basic survival gear and weapons, relying on their unparalleled skiing skills to traverse the hostile terrain. The silent tracks left in the snow were their only evidence, and their survival became a matter of pure, disciplined endurance against the elements and the relentless, pursuing German Wehrmacht. The successful sabotage of the Norsk Hydro plant was only the halfway point of Operation Gunnerside. The escape was arguably the most physically demanding and terrifying phase. The 10 Norwegian Commandos, now split into smaller groups, began a grueling, high-speed ski trek across the vast, frozen expanse of the Telemark plateau. They had to immediately cover immense distances, traveling for days with heavy equipment and minimal supplies, pushing their bodies to the absolute limits of human endurance. The primary group, led by Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg, headed southeast toward the neutral sanctuary of Sweden, relying on sheer discipline and speed to gain a critical lead on the impending pursuit. The German Wehrmacht reaction was massive and immediate. Furious at the humiliation and recognizing the immense strategic loss, the German High Command mobilized around 10,000 troops, including specialized mountain and ski battalions, to sweep the entire Telemark region. German air reconnaissance and tracking dogs were deployed across the plateau. The commandos relied heavily on the terrain. The high mountains and dense forests offered fleeting cover from the search planes, and their superior knowledge of the local trails and mountain survival techniques. They constantly had to monitor their own ski tracks, knowing that a single lapse in caution could lead the highly trained German ski patrols directly to them. The journey to Sweden was an odyssey of cold and hunger. The main escape team, led by Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg, covered over 250 miles of frozen, trackless wilderness, skiing for over 2 weeks in extreme isolation. They rationed their meager food supplies, melted snow for water, and risked hypothermia every time they stopped to rest. Their survival became a masterclass in endurance, navigating by compass and stars across the open plateau where the threat of a sudden blizzard or deep-lying snow was as deadly as the pursuing German forces. Finally, after 2 weeks of relentless, high-speed flight, the main Gunnerside team successfully crossed the border into neutral Sweden. The entire operation was a massive, profound strategic humiliation for the German Wehrmacht, who had committed thousands of troops to hunt down the small team, only to fail completely. The fact that the entire sabotage team managed to escape safely was a powerful propaganda victory for the Allies. More importantly, the successful destruction of the heavy water production at Norsk Hydro was confirmed to have set back the German nuclear program by over a year, forcing the Germans into desperate, last-ditch efforts to restart their atomic ambitions. Despite the spectacular success of Operation Gunnerside and the immense initial disruption to the German atomic program, the victory was tragically not permanent. The German Wehrmacht immediately poured thousands of engineers and laborers into quickly repairing the Norsk Hydro plant. Recognizing the strategic importance of the heavy water, the Germans implemented swift, comprehensive repairs, and the plant was set to resume production within months. The Allied High Command was faced with a chilling reality. The entire German nuclear threat had returned, and a permanent solution was urgently required to prevent the resumption of heavy water shipments from Norway. After intense deliberation and recognizing the failure of precision commandos to permanently disable the heavily reinforced plant, the Allied High Command made a difficult, fateful decision. They authorized a massive aerial bombing raid against the Norsk Hydro facility. The risk was enormous. A bombing raid might still fail to destroy the core heavy water chambers, and the risk of massive civilian casualties in the valley below was extremely high. In November 1943, over 150 United States Army Air Force bombers flew a large-scale daylight mission, pounding the facility. The raid caused heavy external damage, finally forcing the German High Command to halt production at Vemork entirely and planned for the immediate removal of all remaining heavy water stock from Norway. The final, decisive stage of the campaign was carried out by the local Norwegian resistance, in coordination with the Special Operations Executive. German military engineers loaded the remaining, critical stock of heavy water, enough to potentially fuel a reactor, into barrels and transported them to a train ferry, the SF Hydro, on the nearby Lake Tinn. The plan was to transport the dangerous cargo south into Germany. The only way to ensure the permanent elimination of the heavy water was to sink the ferry in the deep lake, a final, high-risk, but more permanent form of sabotage than the earlier plant raid. The task of sinking the ferry was executed by a small, brave team of local Norwegian commandos and resistance agents. Under the cover of darkness, they expertly placed powerful plastic explosives with a long-delay fuse in the ferry's hull, directly beneath the cargo hold. On February 20, 1944, the ferry SF Hydro sank in the deepest part of Lake Tinn. The destruction was absolute. The heavy water barrels were ruptured by the explosive force and the immense depth pressure, scattering the precious liquid permanently into the cold, dark waters of the lake. This final, dramatic act ensured that the German atomic bomb program was starved of its essential material, conclusively ending the multi-stage fight for the atomic key. The multi-stage effort to destroy the heavy water production at Norsk Hydro was one of World War II's most strategically critical and audaciously executed special operations. The combined actions of Operation Grouse, Operation Freshman's tragic sacrifice, Operation Gunnerside's daring raid, the United States Army Air Force's bombing, and the ultimate sinking of the SF Hydro ferry collectively ensured that the German atomic bomb program was starved of its essential material. Without the heavy water, German scientists were unable to develop a functioning nuclear reactor or build an atomic weapon, a terrifying prospect that haunted the Allied High Command throughout the war. The long-term impact of Operation Gunnerside and the subsequent efforts was immense. The entire campaign decisively thwarted Adolf Hitler's ambitions for a nuclear weapon, a technological advantage that could have catastrophically altered the course of the war. Historians widely agree that the destruction of the heavy water in Norway was a pivotal moment, definitively setting back the German program by years and preventing the Third Reich from gaining access to the most devastating weapon ever conceived. The small team of Norwegian commandos, using skill, courage, and ingenuity, contributed directly to the ultimate Allied victory by eliminating a crucial part of the Nazi war machine. After the war, the heroes of Operation Gunnerside were widely celebrated for their extraordinary bravery and skill. Lieutenant Joachim Ronneberg and his team became national heroes in Norway and icons of the Special Operations Executive. Their story of survival, infiltration, sabotage, and escape against overwhelming odds captured the imagination of the world, inspiring numerous books, documentaries, and even major Hollywood films, bringing their incredible story to a global audience. Their legacy stands as a testament to the power of a small, highly trained unit to achieve strategic objectives that profoundly impacted the largest global conflict in history. The Vemork plant, while no longer producing heavy water, remains a powerful symbol of defiance. Today, parts of the original Norsk Hydro complex house a museum dedicated to the sabotage operation, educating visitors about the critical role Norway played in the nuclear race of World War II. The story of the heroes of Telemark is an enduring testament to human courage, strategic foresight, and the immense sacrifices made by ordinary individuals in the face of extraordinary evil. Their actions continue to remind us that even in the darkest hours of conflict, precision, ingenuity, and an unwavering commitment to freedom can change the course of history.